Fantastic.
So, so Tom, good evening. How are you?
Very well. Thank you, Suzanne. Happy Tuesday. Nice to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you too. And for those of you who haven't met us before, I'm Susan. I'm a teacher of many years' experience and one of the founders here at Superfast English. And
My name is Tom and I'm Suzanne's friend and colleague here at Superfast. And the whole idea at Superfast is to try and have a natural social environment where you can practice your English, ask questions about absolutely anything at any time, whether that's grammar-based, vocabulary, pronunciation, or just to practice your English and get involved. There's a Q&A session later on in the week, and today is Tuesday, and our subject for this week is age.
yeah, and that's a very wide subject, isn't it?
Enormous, and it's a nice subject to discuss, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I do agree with you. And for those students and people who are students of English and perhaps studying exams, it's very relevant to those initial conversations about what you're doing and where you are in life, and just generally so many terms and phrases. But over to you, Tom.
Yep, that's a very good point, actually, Suzanne. Whether you're doing IELTS or you're doing an academic English study, whether you're doing any form of proficiency exam in English, or even at lower levels, age is a subject that comes up again and again and again, because that's our journey through life.
Absolutely.
Here's just a few pictures. Again, there's a wide variety of vocabulary to describe different periods of life and different categories. And all I've got here are a few photographs and three questions that follow it. And myself and Susan will put language in the chat that we think is high frequency, useful, practical. You'll be able to hear the pronunciation of the words as well, because as we all know, English is not a very logical language when it comes to the pronunciation, with silent letters, double letters, homophones, etc. So please put any information or questions in later on in the week, or any time. We change our subject every week. And it's usually a subject that we find engaging, that we hope other people will find engaging too. So back to age.
Absolutely. And I suppose, Tom, it's actually worth mentioning that we're obviously, as teachers of English, we're aware that some exams you're given a photograph to discuss, aren't you?
Very true. Yeah, it's very common, isn't it, to compare photographs, colour photographs. First certificate is a very big example of that, but many other Cambridge exams as well, where you're asked to compare and find similarities and find differences between photographs, and use adjectives and describing words to describe the nouns. Because if you get a picture of a person, I'm a noun, you're a noun, every person in this photograph is a noun. So it's a good way to build your vocabulary, and also use language that's a little bit more flexible, because you know, people in language do tend to use the same type of words to describe quite often. So, you know, for example, a good example I think of is the word beautiful. You know, it's big in English, but I don't think it would be as common or as frequent as that word would be in many other languages. But sometimes people see it as a translation and they think, okay, that will do. But there's many synonyms and words that would do the job better.
Absolutely. And of course, you know, I'm looking at my phone here, and we're always showing each other pictures. So even in an informal conversation, exams to one side, we're often looking at other people's pictures. So yeah, a lot of things can be said about these pictures here.
Well, firstly, the main question later on is about categories of age. So you know, I was brought up in a culture where they would say people would live for 70 which is 70 years, a score being an old word for meaning 20, and 70 would be 60, and then 10 years. So 70 meaning 70 years. But as we all know, some people are fortunate enough or less fortunate to live longer or shorter lives, depending on their situations. So, you know, what categories would you break it down into? You know, it's, you know, some countries in the world, they think that the world is divided into 5 continents. Other places think it's divided into 7.
True.
I haven't put a baby on here, but baby is obviously an age. It's a bit of vocabulary that I think it's a very common word for natives, but you don't often hear people whose second language is English to describe a child or a little girl or boy of this age. So she's just began walking. She's sitting down at the moment and not very happy about it. But she's just learning to walk, and obviously humans learn to walk quite late. So you're not too steady on your feet, a little bit
No.
unsteady on your feet. I'll put that in the chat as well as we go, if we put stuff in. So
Yes.
to be unsteady on your feet when we're starting to walk, obviously horses start walking immediately, don't they? And many
Yeah,
other
that's true.
animals, but for
Yes, they
us,
get
it's
up,
over a
don't they?
year. Yeah,
Giraffes. I mean, you have to, when you're, yeah, it's a survival instinct, isn't it? They have to be able to get up.
exactly, or they'll be hunted.
Mm.
So this little girl would be unsteady on her feet. This teenage boy would be steady on his feet. You could also use unsteady on your feet that's here in the chat to describe someone who was drunk, couldn't
Mm.
you?
Yeah,
You
absolutely.
know,
Or unsteady on your feet on a boat if you're wobbling around on a ship.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, trying to find your sea legs.
Yes, sea legs. That's, you see, when we're using English naturally, we come across all sorts of phrases that are actually quite common, but we rarely see in textbooks, do we? In our years of teaching, so many commonly used phrases aren't there in a textbook. Now, sea legs, I've written as one word, but that should be two words. So
Yeah,
when
and the collocation is to find your sea legs. So
yeah,
if you know, if you're a land lover like we are, and then you
mhm.
go to sea and it takes you a little while to feel comfortable, that is to find your sea legs. But you can also use it as a metaphor, can't you,
Mhm.
to feel comfortable in a particular environment.
Yes, absolutely. Perhaps in a new job, you're finding your sea legs. Yeah.
Definitely. And because the United Kingdom is a little island, and it's always been a place where people needed to cross the sea to get anywhere, and historically has always, you know, moved around the world, then there's thousands or hundreds, thousands of metaphors, expressions that are connected directly to the sea.
That's
Whereas
very true.
if you're in a landlocked country, you wouldn't necessarily have that quantity. I'll
All
put that one
right.
in as well, landlocked. It's a nice adjective to describe a place where there is no sea.
Yes, landlocked. Yes, quite a few
Mhm.
European countries are landlocked, aren't they?
Definitely. So there's no sea at all. There might be rivers, but not a sea. So back to the subject of age, there's a lot of adjectives and language we can use here, not only for exams, but for general life and for
Mhm.
description. So what would you say, Suzanne, is the word I was looking for here for this little girl? She's a bit unsteady on her
Yeah.
feet. She's probably only been walking for a few weeks or months. So what do we call children of that age once they're walking, but they're still a little bit unsteady?
A toddler.
Exactly. Well done. Again, as you said earlier
Constitutes.
on, it's a word that everyone as a native would know. It would probably be a very, very advanced level word.
Mm.
However, there are millions of toddlers in every country in the world because it's a chunk of age. I mean, I don't really know what the definition of a toddler is. Do you?
No, no. It's. I mean, what is the age boundary? Sorry, I was looking at the Facebook group and I was putting the word in. I don't know.
For me, it's probably 2 to 6, 2 to 7. No, 2 to 6, 2 to 5.
Two
I'm
to
not
five.
really
Yeah,
sure. Yeah, 2 to 5.
yeah. Sort of the definitely preschool,
Yeah,
and as Tom says, it's an advanced word, but it's a very common word in
yeah,
English. So
yeah.
a good one to have under your belt. There goes another expression. A good one to have to hand, because not so many, even advanced speakers of English, would know this, and
Mm.
it's not a difficult word, I feel, to understand and use.
Exactly, because you know toddlers are everywhere, aren't they? But
Mm.
it's a high frequency word in the sense that there's many toddlers. However, it would be an advanced word because it's a word that you don't often see in books. And I think that's the point I've said to you a few times before, Suzanne, is if, for example, for me for Spanish or yourself for Greek or any other
Yeah,
language that we know or we're interested in, I would love to have that super fast experience where you're just listening to people speaking and using language that is high frequency by natives. Because
exactly.
if I look at a Spanish grammar book or even a vocabulary book, often the language that's being used there is not words that's being used either in the street, in an informal or in a formal environment in Spain.
Well,
So, you
that's
know,
right.
many adjectives that you just think, you know, why have I bothered learning that for when really that's not what people say? And
Well,
that's the whole mission statement for us, isn't it, really?
that's very true. I mean, back in the day when my children were young, I wouldn't have said I've got a young child at home. I would have said I've got a toddler at home. That would be, the natural language that I would use. Nothing wrong with saying I've got a young child at home, but it's just not what a native speaker would instinctively say. Oh, my toddler's, playing in the
Absolutely.
garden, getting dirty.
Exactly. And that's the example, isn't it? We've had, we've had 5 young children between us, but I don't think either of us at any time in our lives would have ever said, I'm going to go home to see the young children. No one would say it, would it? It's just, it would never be said. It's not grammatically wrong and it's perfectly understandable, but if no one says it, what's the point in learning it? And certainly what's the point in using it? So the key word is, okay, there is a specific word, and the word is toddler. And another thing as well, I think, don't want to talk about grammar too much, but I'm going to put it in the chat here. A very easy formula in English, is verb plus er equals noun. And there's thousands of examples that people know about that already.
True.
So if you know the word toddler, you immediately know what the verb is, because you've got talk, talker, walk, walker, drink, drinker, fight, fighter. So it's an advanced verb, but if you know what the noun is, what is the verb? To toddle.
To toddle, yes.
And there's thousands of examples that follow that formula. And formulas mean that you can generate language faster, you can produce language faster, and it just widens your vocabulary without having to think or worry. And that's the whole super fast way, isn't it? Saving time and getting it to make sense. Dance, dancer, there's hundreds we know already, but maybe we haven't made the connection between, okay, it's just a verb, 2 letters, er, and that makes the noun that does it.
And absolutely. And while you were talking there, it just reminded me, because as you know, I've got 2, well, my children are adults now, but 2 children. And I would never said, I'm going home to my 2 children. I said, I'm going off to see my 2. And again, that's a really good example of a native speaker use of language. And actually, once you hear something like that, I think, actually, that's quite easy. I don't even have to remember to say children or toddlers, my 2. And it's instinctively known. So pay attention to what we're saying, guys, because we're actually making it a lot easier for you. And what a good tip Tom's just given us.
Well, I think your one's good there, because I think often we're aware of things that we use too much and we say too much, or that we miss out. But often there's cases of ellipsis or cutting words out that are not necessary. I'm going to go home and see my 2. When you say my 2 what? Well, you automatically know that you're talking about children. It's not going home to see my 2 cars.
Maybe we'd wish that, but no.
It'd be a very strange thing to say.
It would be very, very strange, yes.
So I've just broken this down into 4 areas. So the little girl's a toddler, reaching out for a mum probably. Teenager, which everyone would know, between the ages of 13 and 19.
Yes.
Slightly different from a youngster and slightly different from an adolescent, but these words are also interchangeable, that you can use as synonyms. And also what I would do is, if you were going through exams or you were trying to give a good impression in a speaking or in a writing, is definitely use a thesaurus and find out synonyms of words that are high frequency, and then maybe go on a forum or use us at Superfast to find out which words would actually be better to use in that situation. Because when you do use a thesaurus and you look up a word, for example, good, and you don't want to say the word good because it sounds just too repetitive and boring and simplistic. Although it's a good word, obviously, you want to use something with a bit more kick and a bit more power and a higher level. You can find out what the synonyms are in the thesaurus, but then again, you don't really know which one to choose. You only need one really, but which one to choose, and then really you need a human to tell you that, don't you?
Well, that's very true, and that circles back to us, as you say. So do use this group to ask us and find out which are the common alternatives and the high frequency, as Tom says, because you only need one alternative to really expand your knowledge, but also feel more confident, and the people you're speaking to have a really excellent impression of your command of the language, of your use of the language. You don't need 10 synonyms for words, do you?
No, you're wasting your time and you're wasting your energy.
Yeah.
And also you come to super fast with questions. You can say,
Yeah.
which is the best option here? A, B, or C? Do I do this, this, and this? And then we can tell you what is the reason for choosing that particular option, whether because it's high frequency, because it's safer, because it's more polite, because it's not
Exactly.
so rude, because languages are not mirrors, are they? And
No,
Google Translate is not going to be able to give us that
not
information.
really. It's definitely not. No, absolutely. And if it's if we can answer in a Facebook Live as well as in the chat. So do ask us through the weeks what you need to know, and we're happy to jump on and give you a very short, clear explanation. Then you'll hear the pronunciation of the new words. But what else we got in the pictures here?
Well, these
Different
ladies on
age
the
groups.
top at the right, that would be middle-aged
Mm,
as an adjective,
yeah,
or slightly older. You hear that quite a lot, don't you?
slightly older, yeah.
Slightly older, or in their 40s, or in their 50s.
Because middle age used to be half of the 70, because people were expected to live about 70 years and half it. But nowadays, it's not literally half. I mean, middle age at 35 sounds actually quite terrible. I don't think it would even sound polite to call someone in their mid 30s middle age. They might feel a little bit upset by that. Although in a lot of societies, age is very much respected. Age equals wisdom, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And that's part of it as well. Medical advancements means that people are living longer in many parts of the world. So the attitudes to age and the boundaries have changed, haven't they? And as you
Very,
say,
very
the level of respect as well.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And the lady at the bottom right, being helped by another lady, elderly,
Yeah.
old. Because I mean, if you look at it in this way, how I think with superfast is if you're choosing a word like old, it's going to be negative. It's going to be offensive to many people who
Yeah.
are old, but also that aren't old, perhaps.
Yeah.
So you would substitute a word, but it's perfectly acceptable to use that adjective in many languages, but languages don't always translate well, do they? So
No, this is true. They don't. And it can have different emphasis, different meaning, different ideas behind.
absolutely, absolutely. And elderly would, I think, would you say so? Would
Yeah.
you say, Suzanne, that's a fair substitution?
I think so. Yes. An elderly person. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. It sounds respectful, and it speaks to the sort of person we have in this picture here, someone who is perhaps a little bit unsteady on their feet, a little bit, um, their body is getting old and
Yeah,
not working quite so well. We'll all get there one day, of course. So
yeah,
elderly, yes, I think that's a good word to use, elderly.
definitely. So there's also, I've put here euphemism, and a euphemism is something that gives it a softer sort of feel to it,
Yes.
make it less rude, and makes it more polite. And also the word connotation that I'm putting in now is sort of the picture it paints in your head.
Yes, that's true. It gives you an idea, doesn't it? I'm going to put this on our live version here. Connotation, association, isn't it?
Exactly. It's the association of, your culture, your language, your own life experience with the word. And again, I've made a lot of mistakes in my life directly translating from English into Spanish, and and I haven't looked that great because I didn't realize that the connotation in a different country meant something slightly different, and I needed to
Exactly.
choose another word. But unless you've got someone that can understand a language or knows how it works, it's quite difficult to get that information.
It is, and it's what we call trial and error, isn't it? Sometimes we just speaking another language, make a genuine mistake, and it's not because the word is wrong. And this is why we have a passion for using everyday English and bringing this platform to you, because it is one of the only ways to really learn a language, is to keep up to date and hear everyday conversations, because you're not going to find them, sadly, in textbooks, just simply because a book is published and the language moves on.
Definitely. And you don't want to be speaking like a violent Hollywood
No,
film either, do you?
no,
In a Californian dialect, which is what 90% of the films that people around the world are going to be watching.
that's right.
That's not, because I've seen some And I'm sure you've heard yourself some very embarrassing language and conversations by people that have watched too many Hollywood films and thought that that was the correct language or intonation or structure to be using at that time.
Well, that's right. And while it is obviously really good to listen to films to have an understanding, it's definitely not the best way to pick up everyday language. So what is the best age and why? Oh,
This is a very subjective and personal thing, isn't
it is. Is there a best age? I mean,
it?
every age has its benefits, doesn't it?
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. It's a question with no answer, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
You know,
Yes.
you might have a terrible childhood, then how can that be good? You might have a fantastic childhood. You know, who knows what life has in store for us?
Yeah, absolutely. And we hear the expression golden age, but any age can be golden age. What categories do you use?
Again, how do you break it up? I read a study once that men or boys don't really remember anything before 5,
Oh,
but
interesting.
girls and females would remember as an average of something like 3.5.
Wow.
So there's something in the female memory banks that hold and maintain memories earlier than it does for males. But again, I
Interesting.
suppose that depends on the person. Yeah, I've tried it out in class a few times by asking people on
Well, so
maths for their earliest memory, and it proved to be true.
really, that's
Yeah,
very, very interesting.
my first memory, I was 5 because I traced it back and found out,
Yeah.
where I was and what I was doing on that day,
Mm.
at that period. So what categories do you use? I don't know. What would you say? Break it up into 4 or 5? Break it
Yeah.
up into decades, perhaps?
Yes, I mean, there's a lot of different ways, I suppose, of doing it. Decades, definitely.
Mm,
Childhood, adulthood, two very broad ones.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and
yeah,
they can be subdivided as you've said.
exactly. And then, once you get older, is it just elderly? And then and that could be possibly broken up into other categories. And there is a wide vocabulary as well for people of different 10 years, aren't there? For
Yeah.
every 10 years as well.
Well, this is it. And we comfortably say all they're in their 70s, 80s, 90s.
Yeah.
Yeah. They've
And there's,
reached a century, they're 100 years old.
yeah, yeah. And also it's octogenarian, isn't there?
Yeah.
Meaning 80 years. So there's a different structures for this. And this final question as well, again, it's subjective and it depends
Yes.
on the person, but what are the benefits and drawbacks of each of those years? I think there's a lot less. I don't know, do you find
Mm.
teenagers, sometimes I feel quite sorry for them in the way
Yeah.
that they seem to be very obsessed by what other people think about them, and that
Yes,
does wear off a bit, doesn't it?
it does. Yes. And there's a lot of pressure on, as we've seen in our teaching careers, a lot of pressure on teens to, exams and life and decisions.
Yeah, and to fit in.
Yes. And I think things might be improving now with more understanding that, there are lots of choices in life and you don't necessarily have to fit into a box or what someone has said. But yeah, and then we have the expression carefree childhood. A lot of, I
Yeah.
mean, I'm glad I had a carefree childhood, just ran wild, running, out of the house, down to the beach. Back in the day, that's another expression. It was, you just ran out, the neighbors looked after you, everyone knew where everyone was, but you
Yeah.
felt very carefree. And there's a lot of parts of the world where people can still have that carefree existence.
Yeah.
The world is quite, you're in a small village, everybody knows everyone.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can run
Yeah.
wild as a child.
I mean, I lived in a small village in the mountains once, and I thought, oh, wonderful, everyone knows each other. But a lot of the people, once you got to sort of know them, they hated the fact that everybody knew their business.
Well, that's it.
So
That's the
again, that's advantages and disadvantages, isn't
yeah.
it?
Well,
Yeah.
that's absolutely true. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
So that's age for us. I think there's quite a lot of very
yes.
nice vocabulary in there.
Well, that's right. And, as Tom said, if you've got any questions about this subject, and we just have a broad umbrella, meaning that we start off with one subject. And as you can see, as with natural conversations, we go a little bit in one direction or another. And that's how conversation goes, in so many situations. So we hope you've enjoyed being with us today live. Or if you're watching the replay, put replay in. Any questions, let us know. So I think we shall pause our
Goodbye, everybody.
goodbye. I'll stop the live stream to the group. Nice for you to join us and ask any questions. And I will pause our recording as well.